From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Stop me if you've heard this one. South Coast Rail is delayed again. The decades-long effort to bring MBTA commuter rail service to New Bedford and surrounding communities has hit another snag, and it's unclear when trains will start running. That's just one of the challenges facing the region's second-largest city, as officials also press to ensure their big bet on the offshore wind industry pays off. What's the outlook for the whaling city in 2024? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi. New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell, welcome back to the program.
Good to have you. Great to be with you guys, as always.
Let's start with the South Coast Rail. Earlier this week, Fall River Mayor Paul Coogan told our colleague Lauren Brill that their understanding is there is a delay in the anticipated opening of the South Coast Rail project. It was hopeful for this summer, seems really fluid. What's your understanding of where things stand?
Yeah, my understanding doesn't vary much. My understanding is the fall, whenever that is. I don't know if that means Labor Day or when the leaves start to turn, but
fall of 24.
Fall of this fall. I think. Look, so the explanation is they have to work out the kinks, which is to say they've constructed just about everything that needs to be constructed, but they've got to go through a whole battery of safety tests, which for a new line like that is understandably extensive. What I would say is they have to pick a date, though, and publicly announce it. Because like with any project, the projects move ahead when there are hard deadlines that everybody has to work toward. And this, goalpost shifting is can just lead to more delays.
Were you surprised by this? Because like I said, Lauren Brill, our reporter, called your office, and she was told that your administration was unaware of that. Did they not tell you?
We don't have a hard date, so we've.
But about the delay, you were aware of the delay?
We were told fall-ish, right? So it's been nebulous for a while, and
okay.
I think the time for that is over. When it comes to safety protocols, we don't want them to cut corners, of course, right? But at the end of the day, they've got to get this project done. They need to set deadlines for their own internal purposes, but also for the public's confidence, because as your intro suggested, it feels like it's more of the same stuff. It's going to happen. It's a waiting for a Godot kind of refrain that at some point has to end. And look, we look forward to the service. I think, as we've discussed before, it'll be a net positive for the region to give people the opportunity to connect directly to Boston on mass transit. It's not, to my mind, not the end-all be-all as it has long been sold to be, but one more good reason to live in New Bedford.
One more question on this before we move on, which is, you and I talked years ago when I did a big story on South Coast Rail. It's always stayed in my head, you called this version the scenic route because they took the Middleborough line, which is why it kind of darts over there if you look at a map. The idea has been that down the line, they'll do the Stoughton line, which would be more straight to Boston, quicker, less scenic, phase 2. Billions of dollars more. There's a lot of people skeptical that's ever going to happen with the amount of money that would cost, and phase 1 finally getting up and running. Do you still think phase 2, do you think that's actually ever going to happen?
It could. I'm not holding my breath. I think what people are going to see is, so when this thing opens, whenever that is, you will see a surge of interest, somewhat driven by the novelty of being able to get on a train and go to Boston. It'll normalize at some point. When that happens, I don't know, a matter of weeks, a matter of months or something, you'll start to see some patterns. How many people actually ride it consistently, as in like a real commute? I don't know. I suspect it's going to be a fairly modest number of people who do the traditional 5-day-a-week commute to work over the course of a career. But that'll I think will incite some calls for a more direct line, the Stoughton route. My concern is that we will go back, whenever that starts to happen, we'll go back to the approach to economic development in New Bedford, which is, let's just build this direct line to Boston, when there's a whole lot of other things that we should be focusing on: the development of the port, the development of the cultural sector, the manufacturing sector, all these things that we in my administration have been focused on for more than a decade now. So that would be my concern. It's not to say we shouldn't be building it. It's like, let's remember we're not going to ever be, unless there's some dramatic change in transportation technology that gets people from point A to point B a lot faster than what's available now. We're not going to be a bedroom community to Boston.
Yeah, we want to talk about wind projects, but before we do, since we're talking about transportation, the new Secretary of Transportation in the Commonwealth said they are going to explore adding toll gantries at the border of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. You good with that?
Well, I read that too. It's not something I embrace, Tim. So it's like tolls for people who are going back and forth. So there are a lot of folks from the Providence area who work in New Bedford and vice versa, and I don't know. I just read it. I think it was this morning or last night, and we really hadn't been given the heads up about it. So I'll just reserve judgment for now. But I'm a little skeptical that that's in the public interest.
I want to talk a little about downtown. You've been very proud over the years of and we should remind viewers, you've been mayor since 2011. You just won another 4-year term. The revitalization of downtown, you can see it. There's a lot of activity down there, but you've hit some challenges, I would say. Of course, the abrupt pullout of UMass from the Star Store building, which was where they had their arts program, and the back and forth that's gone on for months about that. And now this talk about the feds pulling out of the federal building. I guess how concerned are you? Because these are the kind of stable institutions that can kind of anchor a downtown and keep activity going.
Yeah, I mean, both of those incidents or events or developments have concerned me. In the case of the Star Store, that was really abrupt. I mean, here you had a university with its arts program right smack dab in the middle of downtown, and the chancellor decided, not on a whim, but without any effort to reach out to
I believe it was only a month before classes would have started, right?
Right, just pulled the plug on it, and has been unwilling to engage on, well, how do we sort of put Humpty Dumpty back together? So, we want to move forward with the Star Store building, the place that housed the arts campus, one way or the other. We hope that UMass Dartmouth will be part of that, but we got to move forward assuming that they're not going to be part of it. But it is a big deal. And then, the federal building as well. So the federal building, independently of that, has come to the fore in the last couple of months because the General Services Administration, which is essentially the landlord for federal facilities across the world, said that it was selecting that building and 2 other buildings in New England among all of their properties for closure, and the justification was that it wasn't theoretically profitable, right? So the federal government's not in the business of generating a profit, but they look at the pro forma essentially of any given piece of real estate and say, well, is it what's it costing to run the place, and if you were to lease out the space in the private sector, would it be profitable? And so, and of course, in a city that's not part of a major metro, as New Bedford is not, the fair market rents nearby are going to be an awful lot lower. And so the building,
and I know that's kind of
unprofitable, but
going back and forth.
Yeah.
Right,
So what we've pulled in the congressional delegation, and we've engaged them in earnest on that very point, which is, look, if profitability on paper is something that matters to the federal government, you might as well put every federal facility in the hottest real estate markets in America, right? Which doesn't make any sense. So we continue to push back on it. In answer generally to your question, yeah, these things are concern me. Bedford's a center city. It's, as we know, the biggest commercial fishing port in the United States. It's a regional center, and it should have things like a federal building. It should have other anchor institutions, like institutions of higher ed, like UMass Dartmouth. And so we continue to work on these things. But yeah, as priorities go, they're both very high.
We have to go to a break in about a minute or two. So I just want to ask you about this briefly. You made a trip to Israel this month, and I heard you talk to Chris McCarthy at BSM about how you had to keep those plans under wraps for security reasons. So it was a very interesting interview about that. So check that out on the podcast. I guess one question for you on that trip was, what was your biggest takeaway when you went there and what you saw?
Yeah. So I guess it's just this Western country that shares so much in common, both culturally and politically, with the United States, living under the constant threat that it does. So, everything's so close to one another.
Yes.
So downtown Tel Aviv is 35 miles from the Gaza border. It's about the same distance between downtown New Bedford and downtown Providence. It's all right there. And then you look, and then west of downtown Tel Aviv, 8 miles away, is the West Bank. So everybody's like on top of one another, and some folks fire rockets from time to time, sometimes fairly frequently at the others, and so it's really a rough neighborhood, as the term's often used. It's the term often used to describe the place. I do think it affirmed a lot of what I sort of already believed, which is that the alliance between the United States and Israel is really important, and we really do need to stick with Israel, despite what we're seeing in the way the war is being prosecuted in Gaza. There are a lot of people suffering in Gaza, and I think the Biden administration has been spot on in bringing those sets of issues to the fore. So there would have to be ways to minimize civilian casualties there. But at the end of the day, Israel has to defend itself.
30 seconds, because there are going to be people watching this going, why is the mayor of New Bedford going to Israel?
Yeah.
Foreign policy is not a big pillar of
Right.
what you do. So 30 seconds.
No, it's a fair question, and I would answer it this way. So the U.S. Conference of Mayors has sponsored these trips year in and year out, and groups of mayors have gone over. I had the opportunity to do it at no expense to New Bedford taxpayers, of course, but it's something it was worth spending my time on because people are talking about these issues. There were protests in my city over what's going on over there, and what's going on over there is really complicated. And I thought I could learn a lot by spending 4 days on the ground there, which is not so long as to really disrupt the operation of city government. So I thought it was certainly worth my time to do that.
Could be useful if you're ever in Congress too, I would assume.
I guess it would be.
Interesting.
We have to go to break now, right?
Ted is our politics editor. I don't know if you've heard that before.
Always looking ahead.
We are going to go to a break. When we come back, offshore wind is a big industry in New Bedford. Could it be at risk with the next presidential election? Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell. Mayor, I don't have to tell you, the Commonwealth has invested heavily in building a terminal in New Bedford for offshore wind projects. The Republican nominee for President, Donald Trump, who is leading in the polls, likes to say, quote, I hate wind, and sounds like he will do what he can to stop wind farms. How concerned are you for the future of the terminal if he gets into office?
Well, I'm concerned about New Bedford's role in offshore wind if he gets into office. Even the folks who worked for him in his previous administration have said as much to me. People have worked fairly closely with him. And I think the folks in the wind industry see it too, and they're making the investment decisions based on the possibility that he might get back into office. There are some projects that will move forward nonetheless. So, for instance, if the Avangrid project moves forward, if the Avangrid project is awarded some of the electricity in the current Massachusetts solicitation or the multi-state solicitation, it'll go forward because they're largely through their permitting. I think the concerns for some of the projects that really haven't gone that far through the permitting process and are looking at continued permitting after January 20th of 2025, those are the ones that are wondering whether they should be putting more money into it. The reality is that things still may change, will be different than they were 4 years ago. I'm somewhat hopeful in the sense that what I think even former President Trump would agree with is that in the offshore wind industry, you're looking at jobs that cannot be exported to China or anywhere else. They're domestic jobs. They're jobs of folks that are up and down the East Coast and lots of states, but not just on the East Coast, but also in some red states too, in places like the Midwest and the Great Lakes and in the Gulf as well. So it's not just a sort of a Northeast thing anymore. I think that's changed in the last 4 years. Maybe I'm being wishful about this, but it's definitely looming over the industry.
You mentioned the multi-state procurement. Just for viewers who haven't heard a lot about this, this is Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut are working together to contract for more offshore wind farms, and it's a big complex process. But we just saw the bids, which themselves are complicated, but at a very high level. When you look at what they're proposing, as I read your letter that you sent out, they're looking to kind of spread the work out potentially and not necessarily put as much as I might have expected New Bedford. And I noticed a lot of talk about Salem. Who was the mayor of Salem? The now Lieutenant Governor, who I know is your friend, Kim Driscoll. Are you worried that Lieutenant Governor or these companies are going to say, like, well, Salem's the new favorite child in the Healy administration. We got to push a lot of the wind work up there?
Well, I certainly would love for everything to be in New Bedford, but I think we did pretty well. So the three major bids included operations and maintenance in New Bedford, and the significance of operations and maintenance is this: it's the source in the industry of the most jobs, and that's been true in Europe for the last 20 to 25 years. The places that do O&M, as it's called, do very well, and they attract a whole lot of other work. And in part because it's where it's where prolonged investment lies. When we're doing an O&M, you're doing it over the life of the project, which can be anywhere between 20 and 30 years, as opposed to marshaling work, which is what's going on right now in New Bedford, which is the assembly of the pieces.
Once it's up, it's done.
It's just a construction project that lasts about a year and a half or so in most cases. So. Would I like to have seen more marshaling? Sure. Will we probably get some of that from Salem? Probably, just because of our geographic proximity. We're right, more or less.
So you're not worried you're at a political disadvantage to Salem right now with these wind bids?
I think I made it known, and when the Salem facility was identified, was pushed forward, that I thought it risked becoming a competitor to New Bedford. So I haven't pulled any punches on that. But I think at the end of the day, New Bedford is, on the East Coast, by far the most suited harbor or port for offshore wind development because of its geographic proximity, because of the extensive infrastructure that we have that's useful to the industry, and because of the built-in seafaring workforce that we have, among other reasons.
We've talked about this on this show. Actually, the last time you were on, I asked you about the tension between wind projects and the fishing industry, and it's, you have to straddle that fence as mayor there. And I noticed earlier this month that you urged the New England Fishery Management Council to open what's called the Northern Edge Scallop Grounds in a letter to them. And I think you went to Connecticut, didn't you?
I did.
You did, to testify for that. All right. Look, that aside, for a lot of our viewers, most people know that the fishing industry in New Bedford is big, but scallop fishing or harvesting is, in particular, that's huge, right?
Yeah, it's New Bedford's cash crop, and it counts for a lot. So for the economics and the regulations concerning the scallop industry and the fishing industry in general are really arcane, right? So I'll spare your viewers all that.
Even for Newsmakers.
But even for you guys, I see your eyes glaze over. And but I think people have to know scallops are the most profitable fishery in the United States, and that fishery is centered in New Bedford. About 80% of the landings in America's biggest fishing port are scallops. And scallops are regulated in sort of this rotational method, just kind of like farming. You open up those areas and where scallops are plentiful, and close those areas where they're not, and let them grow back, that kind of thing. It's kind of like farmers managing their fields. So in the case of the Northern Edge, as the name implies, it's the northern edge of Georges Bank, which is historically one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. It's been closed to scalloping for about 30 years. There have been arguments that if you open it up, fishermen might infringe on sensitive fish habitats and all that. I think the science is pretty clear at this point that that's a risk that can be managed. And so when I went to Mystic to testify before the Fisheries Management Council, I had a sense of deja vu, and I was like, geez, I've done this, I've been in this hotel room, I've testified about this stuff before. So it turned out, I Googled it on the way over there, and it was 9 years ago. So I'd been in office for a while, as you pointed out, Ted. April of 2015, I was saying the same thing. So it's like, back when Donald Trump was just a reality TV personality, it's been that long.
10 seconds, when do you expect a decision on that?
Well, so I think they will give some guidance in the fall, and then proceed with the next step in the regulatory
Everything's
process.
coming in the fall in New Bedford.
Yes, fall. Wait till the fall.
I've been reading New Bedford columnist Jack Spillane for a long time. He's now at the New Bedford Light. Really, as long as I've been a reporter in this region, I've been reading Jack. And so this line caught my eye in a column Jack filed recently. Quote, Mayor Mitchell seems to somehow have a view that the role of the press is to play cheerleader for the city, including his administration. Any kind of critical eye at what he's doing is out of bounds. I have no doubt you disagree with Jack on that, but I also trust Jack as a fair-minded fellow. So what do you say to that suggestion that maybe you're a little too high-handed with your critics?
Well, I'm also the same guy who was in the New York Times touting the fact or telling everybody that we should have the New Bedford Light, and that can subject me to all manner of criticism, which they
do,
and they do, right? But because I value the Fourth Estate, and I'm deeply troubled, and we've talked about this before. Of the withering away of local media coverage. It has diminished us as a city, frankly, and I find that deeply troubling. But Providence deals with it as well, and pretty much every city in America is dealing with it, and nobody has a comprehensive answer to the problem. So, no, look, I'm still a lawyer, right? We argue about stuff, and that's okay, and spar. And I think that's part of it. I try to make my case, but at the end of the day, I value what the press does.
All right, New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell, really appreciate you having you on the program.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back on Newsmakers. Stay with us. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. On Wednesday, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley unveiled his budget proposal at the annual State of the City address. Smiley's $598 million tax and spending plan calls for additional money for the city's schools, more police officers and firefighters, and for investments in climate resilience, telling the audience that rain is the new snow. But he also took the opportunity to target the state's largest hospital group, Lifespan. As we've discussed on this show, the owner of Rhode Island Hospital and its sister facilities has failed to reach a payment in lieu of taxes agreement to reimburse Providence for city services.
Hospitals throughout the region have figured out how to make meaningful long-term investments in their host community. Lifespan, you can too.
Smiley's budget is now in the hands of the City Council, which is expected to vote on a final plan in the coming months. It first has to go through a City Finance Committee, so it can be vetted there. Our colleague Alexandra Leslie has all the information you need to know about the mayor's budget proposal on WPRI.com. That's all the time we have. You can catch Newsmakers on the go. Subscribe to our podcast right now by scanning the QR code on this side, on the left side of your screen. If you missed any of it, our first half guest was New Bedford Mayor Jon Mitchell. You can watch it on WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.